So you're trying to intimidate me? You're acting like a bully. You're trying to get under my skin. My patience is wearing thin. And you're taunting me! And you're taunting me! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it right now! Stop it! Stop it right now!
Welcome to atRecovery. This is Johnny B, and these are my opinions. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about what does it all really mean. It's kind of more of a tongue-in-cheek title, because what I wanted to talk about was the importance of a little thing I like to call definitions. Definitions of words. So I'm going to go through a list of words that are pertaining to the atRecovery quote-unquote program, and I'm also going to kind of go through and give some contextual stuff. So if we don't know what the words mean that we're utilizing, it makes it really difficult to have any type of cohesive discussion about something. I did want to start off with a story. I think sometimes I come off maybe a little bit pretentious or condescending. That's not my intention. I too fall victim to not fully understanding the definitions of words quite a lot. But in my experience, the difference is I actually want to be corrected. I feel really bad, not stupid, but I feel bad when I use a word incorrectly because I'm disseminating ignorance. And that's not something that I really want to aspire to do with my life. So I was having a discussion with a young guy that I sponsor or sponsored for a while about like a process. And I was like, oh, well, it's like secular. And what I meant by secular was non-Christian, because I had always heard, or it had always been used in the context. And see, that's a problem with definitions, is that if we don't actually go look up words and what they mean, we have a tendency to derive them from context. And therefore, it's really more of a representation of the culture from which we have adopted our language. Wow! That was pretty cool that all came together like that. In all seriousness, that's why words have a tendency, you do get into what's called semantic arguments, where people are using words that mean the same thing, and they're actually making the same point, and they're agreeing with each other, but they just don't know because they don't fully understand the language that they're using. And I fell victim to that. I was kind of discussing with him Islam was secular because secular just means non-Christian. Well, come to find out that's not actually 100% correct. He pulled out his phone and looked it up, and I'm grateful for that. And I really am, because he corrected me, and now I know to just avoid that word altogether because I don't think I fully understood the definition of it. But that's okay. It's okay for me to make mistakes. It's okay for me to learn from my mistakes, and I have to be willing to be corrected in this whole process. We're not talking about learning today, and we're not talking about open-mindedness, which is what all this is about. My intention is to seek knowledge and to seek a better understanding, and so basically I was like, thank you for fixing that, and thank you for, telling me what I was doing wrong, or what I was saying wrong, and so in the future I can correct that. Does it all mean? For me, I found that humorous because, what does it all mean? Well, it all means the definition of the words of which we describe it. Okay, but it's not that funny. But anyways, so the atRecovery program, if you go to the website, atheisticrecovery.com, The word atheistic comes up, and that's the reason why I wanted to put forth this video, audio, podcast. Here we go again. We're getting into like this nebulous of, do these words actually really mean anything? Doesn't matter, I don't think, at least for this part. My point is, yeah, I wanted to address that because I didn't use atheistic as kind of a slight. I used it in its truest contextual meaning as a descriptive word. The process that I am putting forward, or that I am describing, is that it is without God. But we'll get into that. But our society really has to get a little bit better at utilizing the definitions of words. You know, because you hear a lot of words thrown around like communism, socialism, fascism, religion, cult, and nobody seemed to, people, and it's funny because back in the day I can understand you had to lug around a huge book full of words and you had to look up each one, and that was just too much work. Now you can just look it up in your phone and you'll find just countless definitions for that word and further discussion about that word and the etymology of that word. So there's that importance of words on society. When we say atheist, when we say agnostic, when we say humanist, when we say secular humanist, when we say blah, 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 whatever, just make all these things up in order to avoid a word that has received some type of negative connotation, even though it's not the actual definition of the word. I think that instead of allowing us to just kind of throw up our arms and walk away from the truth, it's important to push forward and say, and to educate people and say, well, that's not what the word means, and so our society is only going to, evolve in a direction that has some form of integrity to it if we're willing to have uncomfortable discussions or be made a fool of because we used a word wrong. I have tremendous respect for individuals who are like, I don't fully know if I understand the meaning of that word. And to be honest with you, sometimes I go, well, I don't really feel comfortable defining it, so let me look it up because I'm just pretty sure I'm using it correctly. But if you actually want a definition, let's both see what it means. And then there's the importance of words on self. It's on your self-esteem. What do these words mean? Two of the words that are often convoluted are ignorance and unintelligent, dumb, stupid, moron, blah, 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 blah. I'm very ignorant. I guarantee you there's lots of things. If you put me like in front of a car engine, there's lots of things about a car engine that I'm ignorant of. It just means that I don't know. I don't know it. It doesn't mean that I can't learn it. It doesn't mean that I'm not smart. It just means that it's not something that I've taught or learned about or taught myself about and become versed in. So I think it's important, though, to differentiate these words because people have a tendency to get upset. And it's like, if I was to say to somebody, what we're having right now is you're arguing from ignorance. And then people have a tendency to get very upset. Like, I called them stupid. I didn't say you're arguing from stupidness. I said from ignorance, and let me educate you this topic because I apparently know more than you do. And people don't like that. They don't like to be definitively proven wrong. And I don't really honestly understand that. If I'm doing something wrong, I want to be told definitively, that I'm doing it wrong. If it's an opinion, then yeah, I'm gonna probably argue with you. But if it's like definitively wrong, I mean, like if we look it up and it's like, oh, potatoes, oh, I was thinking of watermelons. Nah, I don't want to continue to walk around at the grocery store going, do you know where the watermelons are? And they're like, you're standing right in front of them, and I'm like, no, these are potatoes, you big dummy. They're potatoes. I don't want these. I want watermelons. These are potatoes. And I think that's that's kind of what's happening with more complex words or words that have more of that are a little bit more difficult to understand because they're labels on constructs or beliefs, and that's a little bit harder to understand. That's why we need to go and look them up. And then there's the importance of words emotionally. I think that most people understand words on two levels. They have the intellectual level, which is like that rational understanding, and then they have the intuitive level, or the emotional level. So if you say father, depending on what your relationship with your father was like, is how you will feel about that word. I knew a lot of people that didn't like that word in religion or didn't like saying our father in AA meetings because their father was not that great of a person. Also, they were adults and they didn't need a father anymore. And so they found it very disconcerting to have to continue to, say that. But there is that emotional context. And when we get into words or we get into discussions about words, one of the things that I like to keep in mind is I have an emotional understanding of that word, and is that beneficial? Somebody says pagan, somebody says Christian, somebody says Muslim, somebody says God, somebody says Jesus, disciple, children. All of these words have two understandings to them. They define something, but then they also have this contextual understanding that's emotional. It's on an emotional level. And that's why when you say atheist in a church, people think, oh my God, that's Satan. And it's like, what? You totally no, because I just said basically vacuum, and you were like, oh my God, there's everything over there. And it's like, no, it's a vacuum. It's not a thing. It's a non-thing. That's another thing that we need to keep in mind, or I need to keep in mind, or people should keep in mind. A lot of things to keep in mind of when we're having discussions is the words and how we feel about the words and what we know about the words, because those are two different things. One of the things that you run into a lot whenever you're having an argument and it starts digressing into an argument of words, like whether or not we're just keep repeating the same words over and over again, and then somebody comes up and says, oh, you're just arguing semantics. When an argument becomes semantic, it's because we're using the exact same words, or we're using words that are true synonyms, and not like a lot of, even in the dictionary, it said that agnostic and atheistic were synonyms. They're not really synonyms because they don't mean the same thing. And we're going to discover what they mean because I looked them up. I looked a lot of things up. So, another thing that's important to point out is that if you have a quote unquote belief system or worldview that is based on words, which most likely it is. We think in words because we use words. And so whenever you're creating words in your head, you're just not speaking them out. And that's how we communicate with one another. So that's how we learn to communicate with ourselves. So not only, if we don't understand the words we are using, our worldview is views built on sand because we don't understand the meanings of the words we are using to define it, therefore easily knocked over, which is why you'll run into people that are so adamantly, aggressively protective of their ideologies or their belief systems because they are not very strong and they're not going to hold up against any real pressure. And so they're like, hey, leave that alone. Don't touch that. That's going to fall down. And then I'm going to be very much going through an existential crisis, and I don't want that. So leave it alone. Stop asking me to define words and stop asking me to draw logical conclusions because it's not going to end well. And and I'll be lost, and my world will have no meaning, at least for a while. And I don't. How do I function? I'm gonna be homeless without my presuppositions. One of the things that I find amusing about things built on sand is that anyone that's built a sandcastle knows that you can only build it so big before it crumbles under its own weight. And I do believe that that's one of the issues that the 12-step fellowships are facing right now, is that they are kind of built on sand because that's all they had back then. I'm speaking metaphorically, obviously. But what I mean by that is we have a lot more knowledge now about mental health issues. We have a lot more knowledge now about what an allergy is, AA. And these words don't make any sense anymore. You can't call alcoholism an allergy because it's not. Because we defined the word. Biologically, what an allergy is. We've defined it. And it is not what alcoholism is. And it's not even defined in the book. And then we have words like addiction, which is also not defined in any of the literature. But we say it's a disease. Enough, it has no differential. It's just, you just know when you see it. The issue with the 12-step fellowships is that they were built on kind of the best, I guess, in the 30s when AA kind of came to be. It was built with the best material that was available. Unfortunately, now we're looking back and we're going, yeah, that was sand. Because we've disproven a lot of it. And there's a lot of information out there, and this is the direction you need to be going with your energy, because what you're doing is not working, and it's going to continue to not work, and it's going to get worse because you can't keep people ignorant. A society does not progress by trying to keep people ignorant. You can't continue to deny evolution and think that your society is going to progress, because you have to literally actively suppress any information that comes up. Christianity has already gone through its enlightenment. And now I think that the 12 steps are kind of faced with the same dilemma. The science is saying we're full of crap, and we don't like that, even though what we're doing is not working because the people are not as ignorant, under the true definition of the word, as they used to be. And when we walk into a meeting and they talk about God, we're like, God doesn't exist. So what are you, I would say a good 75 to 80% of people that walk into a meeting, when they see the word God, their first thought is, that's not a real thing. That's like a cool idea, or I can talk metaphysically about maybe the construct of God, but it's not a physical entity that I can have a conversation with. And so we're not talking about that right now, but what we're talking about is the fact that we have to start re-examining the words that we're using. And atRecovery does that, and the way that I have it outlined, atRecovery takes the language that exists and redefines it into a more contemporary understanding. So, I wanted to go through a couple of definitions of things that you're going to run into in the atRecovery program. Now, atRecovery, I call it atRecovery because atheistic recovery still kind of makes people go,
I don't like atheistic because that means that you believe in worshiping the devil.
So I call it atRecovery, and I think that's awesome. I like it. So that's what I called it. But the at means atheistic. So the first thing I went and looked up was atheist. Atheist is a noun, and it is defined as a person who denies or disbelieves the existence of a supreme being or beings. So if you go further down the rabbit hole and you define what disbelieves means, because anyone that you ask will go, hey, yeah, an atheist, it's a person that doesn't believe in God. And that's true. An atheist is an individual who doesn't believe in God. And more, most people are atheists because they don't believe in God. It's not an affirmative. When you talk about belief, when it comes to atheism, it's referring to having no belief in, refusing or rejecting a belief in. You can have a disbelief in outer space alien people, with like little green men, whatever, or life somewhere in the universe. If you ask someone if they're atheistic towards extraterrestrial life and they go, well, I don't know, that means yes, they're atheistic because they don't have the belief. They lack the belief, and it's very difficult for me to convince people of this because they have this understanding that an atheist is the opposing belief to a theist. And they are, because a theist has this one definitive trait. They have a belief. And if you don't have that belief, or you are lacking that one definitive, meaning something that defines trait, then you're an atheist. If you don't have a belief in God, then you're an atheist. And if you don't know, then you don't have a belief. It's not, I was talking to somebody the other day about, there was like this table, there was like this cup on this table, and I said, I'm either holding the cup or I'm not holding the cup. I can't not know if I'm holding the cup. I mean, I guess I could if I couldn't understand, but even then I'd still be holding it. If I couldn't feel it, I'd still be holding it or not holding it. That's the same thing with a belief. I either have it, I'm holding it, or I'm not holding it. And not knowing is not an available answer. Because if you don't know, then you don't believe. And if you don't believe, then you're an atheist. A theist, conversely, is the belief in one God, creator, ruler of the universe without rejection or revelation. And there's several different types of theists, but basically they have that belief. Now we're also going to get into Gnostic. Now, a lot of people out there go, are you an atheist? If you ask them, are you an atheist? No, I'm an agnostic. Okay, I didn't ask you if you were an agnostic. That's a different question. That answers a different question. I asked you if you were an atheist. Do you believe in God? No, I'm an agnostic. Once again, agnosticism has nothing to do with the question that I just asked you. Really? Yeah. So kind of walk with me here for a minute. So Gnosticism, we'll talk about Gnosticism in a minute. But Gnostic is relating to knowledge, especially esoteric, mystical knowledge. Gnosticism, anytime you hear people talk about Gnosticism, you're talking about knowledge. And esoteric meaning knowledge that's held by few or that's not readily available. Christians or Muslims that truly believe in this system, they would call themselves Gnostics most likely because they have some knowledge that is unique to them that allows them to draw this conclusion. And some of them don't, and they would be an agnostic theist. Now, a lot of times, too, when you bring it up to somebody who actually knows a little bit about Christianity, and you say, well, no, a Gnostic is answering a question of knowledge, and they'll go, well, no, the Gnostics were the people in, like, the first couple of centuries that, blah, I don't know, but I've heard the word in Bible study, and blah, cha-cha, I'm going to keep talking. Because I don't know what I'm talking about. And I looked it up on Wikipedia. And I looked it up on Wikipedia just to find out, but I know it has nothing to do with when people call themselves agnostics. Because they're not saying, I'm not a Gnostic. Like a follower of Gnosticism. But Gnosticism is a prominent heretical movement of the 2nd century Christian church, partly of pre-Christian origin. Gnostic doctrine taught that the world was created and ruled by a lesser divinity, the Demiurge. Man, it's a weird word. Why do they even put those in here? And that Christ was an emissary of the remote supreme divine being, esoteric knowledge, gnosis, of whom enabled the redemption of the human spirit. Whatever. It basically has it's more of a different way of it's kind of like Christian different. The point for this discussion is that when people say they're agnostic, and then you start pointing out that, well, not agnostic, it's not agnostic, it's agnostic. Because the A is a prefix, and the G is silent. So it's agnostic. That's why when you remove the A, you call them Gnostics. You don't call them Gnostics. So it's agnostic. And an agnostic, when these people are referring to it, it's not someone who is not following Gnosticism. So there's that. It does not mean I don't know in the contemporary vernacular that we use it today. But, so the definition of an agnostic is an individual, it's a noun. It's a person who holds that the existence of the ultimate cause as God and the essential nature of things are unknown and unknowable, or that human knowledge is limited to experience. Basically what they're saying is that an agnostic, the definition of an agnostic is a person who is not uncertain, but it's a person who either it's a person who's uncertain, or it's a person who believes that it's impossible for us to know due to the limits of humanity's ability to know. So, like, our brains are just literally incapable of knowing. And that's why you can have agnostic Christians or agnostic Muslims, because these are individuals who believe through experience in, the existence of a deity, but they don't have any knowledge, and they believe that actual knowledge is unobtainable because of the limitations of human understanding. That would be the classical sense of an agnostic. See, the agnostic is not a middle point between atheism and theism. Agnostic is not Gnostic, basically. And Gnostic is to know. To know and to have proof and to have knowledge of this deity. And you can be a Gnostic theist. I wanted to go through a little bit of the etymology and what etymology is. And etymology is the history of the study of the words and where they come from. And it's important to understand where words come from so that we can have a consistent use of words over time. One of the biggest problems that people have with the Bible is that the etymology of the words that are in the Bible were lost. And so we can translate them, but we don't really have any contextual understanding of these words, and they may have understanding or cultural understanding that we would only know by being part of that culture in which the words were utilized and created and adapted. But it's not important. But I wanted to go through a couple things. When you talk about an ism, because you hear this a lot, an ism is a distinctive practice, system, or philosophy, typically a political ideology or artistic movement. Agnosticism, atheism, theism, belief system. And so basically, it's basically saying that so we'll go into theism. And theism is from the late 17th century, and it comes from the Greek theos, which means God. So theism is a philosophy or practice or distinctive practice or system of understanding the universe or world view that includes God or is about God. A theist is someone who follows theism. But what we want to do is we want to, when you want to really understand a word, you need to look at its different components. So you have the ism, and the ism basically is saying that the root word means God. Ism is a belief system about the root word. Atheism means, when you have the prefix a, like atypical. Atypical means what? Not typical. That's something that can only exist in two states. Typical, either it's typical or it's not typical. If you're not typical, then you're atypical. It just means that that definitive component is missing. So it's unusual. If you're unusual, you're atypical. Just like atheism just doesn't include anything that falls under theism, theism being an ism of God. And then we'll go into the etymology of Gnostics, Gnostic, late 16th century as a noun. It's from the Greek nostos, meaning known, Gnostic, meaning to know. Anyways, and so agnostic, obviously, we've gone through this already. Not Gnostic, doesn't know. So when someone says, I don't know, I doesn't know, what they're saying is that, they don't know. That's all they're saying. But if you've asked, but I never really hear anyone say, do you know there's a God? They always ask, do you believe in God? And they say, I don't know. They say, I'm agnostic. I don't know. But for some reason, we have this way that we've kind of conflated know and believe. And I'll do a whole podcast on the difference between know and believe, because I have lots of thoughts about it. But let it be said that I think you have to have both. If you want to believe in something, you also have to know it. And obviously, if you know something, most likely you believe it. A large portion of, I would say, the population is atheist. There's such a negative connotation to that word, and I don't understand why. There's not one for theist. Theist does not have a negative connotation. Someone says, I'm a theist, you don't go, holy cow, you're a crazy person, even though that's most likely true. I'm just kidding. To be honest with you, probably due to the persecution of atheism, has a negative connotation. Basically, it's more of this emotional reaction to the word is something that has been learned and needs to be unlearned because it's a fine word. It describes perfectly what it means. And I'm not convinced. That's a good one. I'm not convinced. Atheists are people who are not convinced. The opposite of an atheist is a theist, and a theist is convinced and believes. And so if somebody says, if you ask someone, are you convinced there's a God? They go, I don't know. I think I'm just an agnostic. And you go, well, and you're also an atheist. Because a theist is convinced, And And that's nothing wrong. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with one way or the other. But what I'm saying is let's use the words correctly so that we can have an intelligent discourse about this subject. Because this subject, when you get into the rooms of recovery, is very, very important. Because like I said earlier, you can't build your foundation on sand or out of sand. You have to have definitions. You have to have something to believe in being true. Not believe in, like, I convinced myself of something. Because if you convinced yourself of something, you can unconvince yourself of that thing. You know how many people I have seen in meetings for years talk about how they're never going to do dope again and they're never going to drink again, and they're out there doing dope again. Or if I do dope again, I'll die, and they're out there doing dope again. I guarantee you, if you show up and like, dude, what are you doing? I thought you were going to die if you did dope again. They look at you like, leave. I don't want to talk to you because you're throwing my words back at me that I didn't understand when I was saying them. I didn't understand them to the point where I couldn't really hold true to them. So I would say it's imperative for a person in any type of program to believe in that program. And to believe in that program, you have to understand the definitions of the words that you're using to describe the program, and they have to be vetted. One of the things that I point out to people if they have a discussion with me about this is that if you're walking away from me because I'm kicking your ass and I'm making you frustrated, what's going on in your head? Because I'm just hitting the buttons that are in your head. If it wasn't bothering you, you would be like able to really have a serious discussion with me. And there are apologetics individuals that are some of them have almost convinced me because they're that good. And they've come from a sense of logic, and they come from a sense of structure and definition. And they're very smart people. And it's very hard for me to find any logical fallacies that they're deriving their conclusions from. You need to be that guy. If you're going to believe in something that's saving your life, you need to be able to defend it to me. Because if you can't defend it to me, you can't defend it to you. Unless, and this is the one caveat, you are willing to admit that I am much smarter than you. And that you will never think of this. Your brain does not have the capability that my brain does. Then you're fine. Because you will never form a substantial argument against yourself the way that I can form an argument against your belief system. So that's your two choices. If you come across me and I'm frustrating you and you can't defend your belief to me, or you become angry or frustrated about because I don't start yelling and cursing and doing ad hominems at people. I literally just challenge them. What does that mean? What does that mean? So you're an agnostic. Are you also an atheist? What does that mean? What is the definition of that? Do you understand the definition for that? Not for me, because I do. I'm doing it for you. What do you? Why else would I do it? But if you can't if you're okay with not being able to beat me in an argument about your belief system, and being able to defend your belief system to me, then you only have two choices. One is that you need to re-examine your belief system because you're as smart as me, and you're going to eventually have what's called a crisis of faith. So if you're like me and you're having any type of, if you've had any type of addictive histories, your crisis of faith is generally going to manifest itself into acting out behaviors because your belief system, once again, is built on sand. So if you're as smart as I am, your brain, that addict that people say is doing push-ups in the parking lot, is eventually going to outsmart you. And you know what? It does. That's why most people go back out. Because your brain eventually goes, this is not real. None of this is real. I'm living in a frickin' sandcastle. And it doesn't mean that you need to run back out and start shooting dope in your arm again. What it means is that you need to examine what all of this was built on. Right? Or, if you've managed to stay clean or sober or abstain or whatever, then you're just not as smart as I am. And your brain may never think that way. And to be honest with you, in a lot of ways, I'm jealous of these people sometimes, because their life seems to be very simplistic and things make sense very quickly, because they don't really question anything and they don't look for deeper meanings in things. The majority of the people do, but they try to actively suppress that because the meanings that they see are not good. You know, the life that they're living, they don't want to find meaning. They don't want to find the meaning of the life that they're living because it's not a good meaning. It's working, buying stuff, collecting things, feeding my own narcissism, feeding my own greed, taking advantage of people. My point is that there's a lot of things that people are doing, and we're going to get into that when we start going through the steps. There's a lot of things that everyone is doing that they've built a sandcastle to protect them, to protect it, that they don't even believe. And that's why they get very upset when you start talking about something like evolution. Because it's like, well, that's not part of my sandcastle, and it's going to knock my sandcastle over, and I don't like that. So shut up. But if you want to have a fulfilling life and you're believing some things and you're questioning whether or not you actually believe these things or whether or not you're tricking yourself into believing these things, then you need to start kicking them. And you need to start kicking that sandcastle, if it is a sandcastle, because the only way you're going to find out whether or not it's a sandcastle is if you try to kick it over. Relating to atRecovery, final thing I wanted to point out, atRecovery, I use the word atheistic as an adjective. And atheistic is from the French root of atheistic, literally translates to without God. So it's an adjective meaning without God. So air conditioning repair would be termed atheistic. Refrigerator repair could be described as atheistic. Describe, adjective, a word that describes a noun. So the noun is recovery. We kind of already went over some of the recovery stuff. The adjective meaning without God. Recovery without God. This is a methodology for creating a form of recovery or creating a recovery process for yourself that God isn't in it. Doesn't mean that you don't have to, that if you believe in God or you don't believe in God or whatever, that's fine. But this is a philosophical approach, and it doesn't believe. I almost said it doesn't believe. The methodology in of itself doesn't have a belief. It can't have a belief. It just doesn't have that component. Just like I was saying earlier, atheistic is not, well, I have to work this one way. No, you can work it many different ways, but the process in and of itself, the framework in and of itself, has taken out the presupposition of God. A presupposition is something that is not questioned. So if we're going to have a discussion about God and whether or not God is a male or a female, we may say, well, we'll take the presupposition that they have genitals or chromosomes, or whatever, and that they most certainly exist. Whenever you get into a room of recovery, there's many presuppositions that are offered to you, unquestioningly. And that's why I think a lot of people go back out, because human beings are, by their very nature, critical thinkers. what's going on right now in our culture is the active suppression of critical thinking. And that's why people are unhappy. And they vote for people that aren't any good for them, for the most part. And they spend most of their life sleeping or sitting in a cubicle, believing that they have to. They've convinced themselves that they have to. I have to do this. All of this is going to be challenged as we work through the steps. Do you have to? Or have you convinced yourself because you want to stay in your sandcastle? Because it's really scary without having a sandcastle to live in. Anyways, I'm just meandering, melandering. Just go ahead and go to Atheistic Recovery. Check it out. If you want to go ahead and support me, that's great. There's some options over there that you can support me on. It's still way under construction. I'm doing good just to get video vodcasts out. Recovery is all about definitions. But the definitions are defining you. And if you can't define the words that are written in the steps that are required or suggested or whatever to define you, if you can't, fully vet the definitions of the words that are included in these quote-unquote steps, how the hell do you think they're going to define you? You're way more complex than a word like atheist. Right? All right. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank some of the people out there that are sharing me. Like, there's some people that shared me, and they're really nice, and I love them, and they're very, very sweet people. And I don't expect this to be huge. I am working on a book. I have it outlined. It's been outlined for like 3 months. But I'm going to try to allot some time every week now towards the book. That will be more of kind of a reference and an outline of the methodology that I will be going over, because I think people like to have a book just so that they can use it to kind of pivot off of as they discuss things. Oh, well, in this paragraph, he makes a complete ass of himself and misspells 3 words and then tries to think that we should take him seriously. Totally kidding. I will have it checked for spelling and grammatical issues that are not intentional. So, anywho, as always, this has been atRecovery, your friend Johnny B, and have a wonderful day.
My patience is wearing thin.
And you're taught at me! And you're taught at me! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it right now! Stop it! Stop it right now!
I'm just a little kid. Other side is something big. Do you think that what you did would bring you back to this?